Welcome back to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're going to demystify a piece of tech that is literally reshaping how we navigate our world. We're talking about Google's Open Location Code, or as you probably know it, Plus Codes. It's this incredible system that gives a digital address to literally anywhere and everywhere on Earth. If you've ever wondered how your phone can, pinpoint a single tent in the middle of a vast desert, or a specific front door in a dense, unmapped neighborhood, well, you're in exactly the right place. All right, so for our focused learners out there, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We've got 5 quick stops. First, the global address problem. Second, Google's open source solution. Third, how plus codes work. Fourth, the magic of shortening. And finally, number 5, real-world global impact. Okay, let's dive right into section 1, the global address problem. So how exactly do you find a location when over half the world's urban population lacks a formal street address? The World Bank found that more than 50% of the global urban population has no structured formal address. I mean, think about that for a second. Without an address, how do you get a package delivered? How do you tell an ambulance where to find you in an absolute emergency? Or even register to vote or open a bank account? For literally billions of people, everyday things like traditional mail, logistics, and emergency services are nearly impossible to access simply because they don't have a standardized way to tell the world, hey, I'm right here. Now, you might be thinking, wait, don't we already have latitude and longitude for this? And while yes, we do, but standard GPS coordinates require up to 5 decimal places and around 18 characters just to get a 10-meter accuracy. Imagine trying to read that massive string of numbers over a spotty cell connection to a 911 dispatcher. One wrong digit and you send them miles away. It's just impossibly clunky for everyday use. But compare that to a plus code. It's incredibly compact, it's clean, and as we're going to see, it's designed specifically for actual human beings to use. Let's move on to section 2, Google's open source solution. So how did a massive tech giant actually tackle this infrastructure gap? The evolution of the Open Location Code happened incredibly fast. Back in October 2014, some brilliant engineers at Google's Zurich office took on the challenge. But here's the absolute kicker. Rather than locking this tech down and charging people for it, Google deliberately released it in April 2015 as a completely open source standard under the Apache 2.0 license. That meant anyone, anywhere could use it for free. And by August of that very same year, Google integrated it natively right into Google Apps. Almost overnight, billions of users had access to a brand new way of sharing their location. The developers had an ambitious but really clear goal in mind. They designed the technology to produce codes that can be used as a replacement for street addresses, especially in places where buildings aren't numbered or streets aren't named. And since it's totally open source, it's language agnostic and completely independent of proprietary corporate databases. It is essentially a public utility for the digital age, just given away for free to make sure everyone on Earth can have a reliable address. All right, section 3, how plus codes work. Now, what's really interesting about this part is how we take a giant planet and turn it into these little tiny codes. Let's break down the math. It all starts with a specialized alphabet. The system essentially transforms traditional global coordinates into what mathematicians call a base 20 alphabet. Instead of standard numbers, it uses a very specific set of exactly 20 characters, the digits 2 through 9, and a hand-picked selection of uppercase letters. You might have noticed some pretty common letters missing from that alphabet. Well, the developers made an incredibly clever design choice here. To avoid misreading or accidentally spelling objectionable words, the encoding specifically excludes vowels. This basically guarantees you can't spell offensive words across the 30-plus languages they tested it against. They also tossed out numbers like 0 and 1 and letters like O and I, simply because they look way too much alike and are easily confused when you're scribbling them down. It's built to be essentially error-proof. So how does this actually pinpoint your exact location? Think of it like a massive zoom-in feature on a digital camera. Step 1. The system divides the entire globe into giant 20-degree by 20-degree blocks. Step 2. Every single time you add a pair of characters to your code, one for latitude, one for longitude, the grid shrinks, zooming in 400 times closer. Step 3. Once you hit the 8th character, a plus sign is dropped in to act as a handy visual separator. And finally, by the 10th character, you've zoomed in so incredibly far that you've pinpointed a specific 14 by 14 meters square on the Earth's surface. To put that scale into perspective, let's look at how this zoom-in concept actually plays out. A short 4-character code gives you a block that's roughly 110 kilometers wide, so basically the size of a massive city or whole region. But as you add characters, the precision ramps up dramatically. By the time you reach that standard 10-character code, your block size is down to just 14 meters by 14 meters. That is roughly the footprint of a single building or a small house. Let's anchor all this math in reality for a second. If you were standing right at the famous Merlion Park in Singapore, your fully resolved global 10-character plus code would be 6PH5 7VP3 plus PR. That one single string of characters completely replaces a complex, messy latitude and longitude coordinate, identifying that exact 14-meter square on the planet. Which brings us to Section 4, the magic of shortening. Let's move to this next part and see how this builds. Because let's be honest, 10 characters is still a bit of a mouthful for everyday conversation. This is where the system gets brilliant. You can actually shorten these codes using what I like to call the area code analogy. If you already know you're in Singapore, you can just drop the first 4 characters of the global code entirely. Your shortened local code becomes just 7VP3 plus PR6 followed by the city name. It is exactly like dropping the area code from a phone number when you're calling your neighbor. It makes the codes incredibly easy to jot down or share with a delivery driver or a friend. But here is the absolute game changer. Plus codes are 100% offline. Because that little plus sign acts as a fixed structural anchor, these codes don't rely on a central server lookup at all. The translation from the code to the location is pure math. That means a basic, bare-bones smartphone with zero internet connection, no Wi-Fi, absolutely no cell data, can generate and decode these addresses perfectly. Out in remote areas, this feature is an absolute lifeline. And that brings us perfectly to our final section, Section 5, Real-World Global Impact. Let's look at the massive humanitarian value this is delivering right now. Plus codes are already out there empowering marginalized populations all over the globe. In Cape Verde, the National Postal Service is using them to deliver mail to streets that literally have no names. Over in the U.S., more than 3,100 homes in the rural Navajo Nation have been mapped so residents can finally receive basic deliveries and register to vote. In India, NGOs have assigned over 9,000 digital addresses to slum residents in places like Pune and Kolkata, which unlocks their access to banking and emergency services. And in Somalia, the International Rescue Committee uses them to map out client locations to ensure families get critical immunizations. This isn't just a fun mapping tool. It is open source tech that is literally saving lives and building economies. So I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative question to chew on. Is this kind of simplified open source geolocation the new lat long? As drone deliveries, self-driving cars, and digital services expand into every single corner of the globe, will traditional physical street addresses eventually become entirely obsolete? It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? Well, you now know exactly how plus codes work and why Google built them. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I will see you next time.